something that I've found over time, and once you accept this, I think the world, and in particular politics and human interactions, make a lot more sense, is that the vast majority of people are unable to grasp the concept of judging people based on their own standards. That is to say, when you look at somebody else's words or actions, you're judging them not based on what your personal morality is, your worldview, what you think was a good idea or a bad idea, what you would have done in the situation. It's looking at the person who's doing the action and going, is this consistent with their morals, with their worldview, with previous things they've said and done? Was this previous position that they're going back on, if that's the case, something that they got a lot of mileage out of, political, financial, social, or otherwise? And are they willing to bite the bullet and admit they were wrong, or admit that they were hypocritical, or admit that they've changed their mind about something? And in my experience, in almost in all cases, people are unable to do this, and they either, if you try to make this point, they will engage in whataboutism. They'll say, well, you don't have any objection to this, or your side doesn't, or X person does this, or Y person does that. And it's just a whole bunch of non sequiturs and stuff that's completely irrelevant. So an example of this before we get into the main topic is the whole issue of election denial. Now, for the past 4 years, liberals have said consistently anyone who denies an election is mentally ill, they're evil, they're a terrorist, they need to be locked up, they're a threat to democracy. The elections are the most safe and secure of any country in the world. And now you have a not insignificant number of people on the left, many of whom have been saying for the last 4 years that it's treason to deny election results, to deny Trump's victory and to say that the election was fake. And if you try to point this out to them, they will say, well, you said the election was fake for 4 years, so it doesn't matter. And it's a complete and total non sequitur. It's irrelevant. The person in question's position was never that election denialism was treason or a sign of mental illness or anything like that. They have always consistently maintained that it can and has happened. The onus is on the person who has been saying for the past 4 years that anyone who engages it should be thrown in jail to explain why they suddenly changed their mind. And so the explanation, once again, you will get if you try to. Some of the smarter ones will attempt to explain why it's different, but in most cases, they will just engage in whataboutism. They'll say, well, Trump stormed the Capitol on January 6th, or Republicans tried to overthrow democracy, or stuff like that. But once again, that is also a non sequitur. The argument, and it's attempting to obscure the argument was not necessarily ever trying to overthrow the government through violence. The argument was that any disputation of the results of an election is a form of mental illness and is evil. This was called evil. This was called treason long before January 6th happened. And to try to kind of say, well, Trump did this, so therefore I'm somehow free of my prior standards and everything I've been saying for the past 4 years is completely irrelevant. I'm judging you based on your own standards, on your own words, of the own things you've done. Many of these people ruined people's careers or put people in jail, or in the case of Rudy Giuliani, took away all his money because of their position that election denial is a form of treason. But because Trump did something, it doesn't matter. And so that brings us to this example, which is the pardoning of Hunter Biden. For those of you who aren't aware, Joe Biden has issued a blanket pardon for his son, Hunter. Not only did he pardon him for the couple crimes that he is, I'm not sure if he was actually convicted. The whole thing was kind of a mess, but the things he is accused of, but of any crime he committed between 2014 and the present. So if I understand correctly, the president's pardon powers are absolute. So if it turns out that all the stuff that was on the laptop was real, the CP, the human trafficking, all the other insane stuff that was alleged, then Hunter just gets away with all of it and doesn't have to face consequences for any of it. And so now you have a lot of people who are going, whoa, 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 whoa. Biden has been saying for the past 4 years, I'm not going to pardon my son. He's promised this numerous times. He said, I will not pardon my son. No one is above the law. And this has been the entire narrative of the left for the previous 4 years, that Trump's not above the law. Does anyone remember when the Supreme Court said the president had partial immunity and they said this was a dictatorship? They said that this was fascism, that we have to hold Trump accountable, that because Trump committed 43 felonies that probably less than 1% of Americans can even name, that means he can't run for president because no one's above the law. Even if the crime is that he misreported a business expense, that disallows him from running for president, and he should spend the rest of his life in jail. And I think that is a widespread opinion, and I don't think that is me strawmanning anybody. And now that is what they said. Now, a lot of people I've seen have been saying, oh, this is great. This is awesome. Biden is right to pardon his son. He went back on everything he said, but Trump exists. So because Trump exists, that means Biden didn't lie. That means that this is not hypocritical, that this is not undermining the entire last 4 years, the entire post-January 6th narrative, because Trump did some bad stuff. And I don't think this is a straw man either, because if you look at it, people will say, well, Biden lied about this. And they'll go, well, Trump lies all the time. And it's like, what does Trump's honesty or dishonesty have to do with anything? Like, it's irrelevant. It's a non sequitur. If your argument is that it's okay that Biden lied about that, and he should have lied about that, then that's fine. We can have a discussion about that. But to say that, oh, well, my previous stances don't matter because Trump's mean is just, it's not relevant to the situation. It's just something that's pulled out of thin air. If you want to argue that the person who's complaining about Biden lying didn't care when Trump lied, that would be a legitimate argument. But that's not the argument that's being made. You're not talking about the person who's offering the criticism. You're talking about the person who's taking the criticism. And I found in a lot of cases, the approach is just that Trump is a felon, so therefore Biden can pardon his son, who I'm pretty sure is also a felon. So it's also, we heard that like the justice system is perfect, which is, I find funny after the whole George Floyd thing. Apparently the justice system works perfectly. It doesn't put tens or hundreds of thousands of young black men in jail unjustly. It's perfect because it convicted Trump of some crime that no one's ever heard of. Because no one is above the law unless you're Hunter Biden, and then you're above the law. And then once again, the argument is, well, Trump pardoned some other guy. It's like, well, what does that? Once again, that has nothing to do with anything. If you're going to argue that the person who's complaining about Biden pardoning Hunter is complaining on the grounds that it's immoral to use the pardon for personal political purposes or whatever, then yeah, that would be an argument. But if you're just saying, look, Biden said he wasn't going to do this, your entire side is based on the rule of law and that nobody is above the law, then yeah, it's complete bullshit. But you cannot make people understand this. It doesn't matter how you explain it. It's just, I don't know if they're incapable of just empathizing with someone else, if they're incapable of seeing things from another person's point of view, if it's just too complicated, if it's just an NPC thing. But you can try to explain it. You can show the clips of Biden saying he's not going to do it. You can show the clips of him saying that Trump has to go to jail or whatever because of the rule of law. And they will just look at that and go, yeah, but Trump's mean, or Trump's a bad person, so therefore it's okay. And the sooner you understand that, I think the more the world will start to make sense to you. Is in general, you can't make very basic logical arguments. I'm not talking about like something really advanced. This seems pretty straightforward to me. It would be like saying you have to judge a car based on how well it does at being a car. And that is modified by how the car is marketed. So like, if it's a cheap car, you have to judge it by the standards of how well it does as a cheap car. If it's an expensive car, you have a different set of standards based on the amount of money you pay for it. But for whatever reason, that also, they just cannot mentally also apply that to people in the same way they do with cars. Now, if you want my personal opinion about it, if we're going to just remove it from the entire context of everything that's happened over the last 4 years, I personally, in a vacuum, don't really have a problem with Biden using it to pardon his son. That's the entire point of electoral democracy, is to get yourself and your party in power for a short period of time, so you can loot the state, you can just grift as much money as possible, and then pass legislation to make yourself immune from prosecution and leave office. I think this is a feature, not the bug. Hunter probably, I don't, God knows how much money he was able to take out of the system. Who knows how much money he was able to get from government contracts, from the Ukrainian government. But like I said, that's how the system works. That's how it's designed. Our leaders are above the law. The idea that they're not above the law is absurd. You just have to look at how the EU functions, how the United States functions, how Canada functions. Trudeau has done so many things over the years and has faced no consequences for it. Part of the idea in a democratic society is the only recourse you have is to vote people out of office. Generally speaking, and this changed kind of under Trump, there was a bit of an understanding that you didn't prosecute people for crimes they committed because it was necessarily partisan. But to me, this is just kind of a core aspect of how democracies work, is that, of course, Hunter Biden was going to take advantage of all the contracts that his father threw his way and that the Ukrainian government gave him money for. And of course, he was going to get pardoned at the end. It's a feature, not a bug. If the American people wanted something different, they would have something different. Just as with Canada, if the Canadian people wanted something different, they would have something different. The idea behind a democratic society is, if you win, well, it depends on how you're feeling on a particular day. Sometimes it's majority rules, sometimes it's minority rights. It depends on whether your side wins or loses. But theoretically, the idea is the sole thing that gives you legitimacy is that people voted for you. And within that context, you can basically just do whatever you want. Unless there's someone you disagree with, in which case it's not democratic and they're a dictator. Once again, the whole thing is just kind of complete and total nonsense. But I do think that this is baked into a cake, that the idea is, because these governments are not in power for very long, like 4 years at minimum, sometimes shorter periods of time, the incentive is to make very short-term decisions, to grab as much money as you can, to pay off all your friends, to pass legislation, or to get the Justice Department or whoever to lay off you and make yourself immune from prosecution, and then throw it off to the next person. If you're doing things properly, you basically keep things going just long enough until you lose power. So then you can blame everything on your successor. And then your successor will undergo all the consequences of your actions, and then you can get voted back into office, then take out a whole bunch of loans in order to prop up the economy, and just kind of repeat this cycle ad infinitum. So I don't personally have any issue in my own worldview with Biden pardoning his son. If I was in this position, I probably would do the same thing. But I don't think it is outside of the realm of just how American politics operate. My issue is just that the people who are defending it, and Biden and the people around him, have spent the last 4 years foaming at the mouth, screaming about the rule of law, screaming about how nobody's above the law and stuff like that. And now all of a sudden it's just completely out the window. So I think these people have no moral courage. They have no fortitude. They're scumbags. And at least if they could admit that, okay, maybe we were wrong, or yes, it is a contradiction, I could respect that. I've been wrong about lots of things. I've changed my mind about lots of things. Being wrong and changing your mind is part of life. If you go through your life and you don't make certain changes to your views, at least on kind of a practical level, then you're probably doing something wrong. But they won't admit to that. They'll say somehow it's 100% consistent, or we're going to defend Joe pardoning his son despite all the shit his son did and that we know he did. But yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I explained that and it wasn't just too much of a incoherent ramble. But God bless everybody. Keep the faith, and I'll talk to you all again real soon.